नमस्कार, आपके साथ मैं अदिति त्यागी। लेकिन इस बार कोई गेस्ट मैं इंडिया से नहीं लेके आई हूँ। इस बार जो मेरी गेस्ट हैं वो इजराइल से हैं। वो इजरायली कर्नल हैं। इजरायली फोर्स में उन्होंने सर्व किया है। कर्नल मिरी, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर सेइंग yes for this interaction, and I really appreciate that you have agreed to give me this time, and I'm really looking forward to your insights in this interaction, during this interaction. So first of all, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very honored and I really look forward to our conversation.
First of all, Colonel Mary, there have been voices who have been drawing parallels between India and Israel, the situation that exists between India and Pakistan, and the challenge that you are facing from Hamas in Israel. Though the fact remains that when it comes to India and Pakistan, it's a battle between two nations, and they own air force. Whereas if we talk about Israel, Hamas doesn't own any air force. So first of all, just to start with the basic, what are your initial thoughts on the conflict that had played out in the last 3 weeks or so?
My heart, first of all, goes out both to all of the Indians, the Hindis, on the horrific terror attack that happened and what was before this war started. And I'm going to call it a war because it was between two countries. Both used their military capability. And when you're talking about a country, not a non-state actor like terror organizations, but a country that are members of the same type of international organizations, that each of them are supposed to abide as nation states to international law, to the laws of engagement. And in that sense, I looked at that and said, that is similar to international wars. And I look at that from the side and say, Israel borders both countries, but we also border an area which is a non-state entity, and that's the Gaza Strip that has been ruled for Hamas. So on the one hand, it's a border. On the other hand, we have a border with an entity that is not a state actor. It's not recognized as a state actor. It's defined in itself as a terror organization. What developed after Hamas's attack, after Hamas started a war against us, has been that we've also been fighting against additional non-state actors inside other countries, like Lebanon, like Syria. So when I looked at the India-Pakistan confrontation, I was seeing elements not just from Israel against Hamas, but also against Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiites and other terror forces that were in Syria. And in that, it's the sense of how you define who's against you, what they're calling for, the capabilities that they have, but the difference between the state actors and the non-state actors.
So that's an interesting observation, as you rightly pointed out, that it was a battle between two state nations, and plus the point about non-state actors being protected, in this case when we talk about India Pakistan, in this case being protected by a nation's army and air force. And this was actually the main point of the Indian government, that we were targeting, or the Indian armed forces, that we were targeting the terror infra across the border. But it was actually the Pakistani government, the Pakistani armed forces, which came out in the defense of these terrorist organizations. So when you saw, as you choose to call it a war, we also called it a war. But there have been many people, many experts who said that no, it is not a war. It is, and hence there is no question of a ceasefire. So people have questioned this word, this term being used. What I need to know from you is, as a defense expert, when you saw the action on the part of Indian armed forces and the way Pakistan retaliated, what was the thought that came to your mind, and what are the prominent points that you would want people to address or to pay attention to?
I saw the effectiveness of the Indian military. Now, when I say the term effectiveness, it means that they knew what they were targeting. They targeted them effectively, and they didn't do more than what they had to do, or for that matter, less. I'm very impressed by that. Because when you're talking about the capability to look at where the threat is on the other side, understanding the terror organization, the non-state actor, the connection of that non-state actor, the terror organization, in this case, as you called it, to the host state, to the state that's hosting it. I'm not conversant to say the exact connection between the host state and the terror organization, but Aditi, for me, it's enough that they are in the host state. I don't know if they're supplying them the weapons, if they're giving them additional capabilities. They're allowing them to
Absolutely,
be there.
absolutely, absolutely.
But
I'm just interrupting you. I'm just interrupting you. They have been doing so. And I will like to point out Hafiz Saeed. Hafiz Saeed, he's the head of Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is based out of Muridke. And Indian Armed Forces targeted Lashkar-e-Taiba, which also has a new name now. And now it calls itself as TRF, the Resistance Front. And Hafiz Saeed is not just wanted in India. US has declared bounty on him. And not just US, even he is the UN designated global terrorist. If I'm not wrong, I would like to point out more than 90% of UN designated global terrorists, they are in Pakistan. And here I would also like to point out, if you go to the US State Department website and the foreign terrorist organization that they have banned, you will find Lashkar-e-Taiba there. You will find Hizbul Mujahideen there. You will find Jaish-e-Mohammed there. And Lashkar and Jaish, I would talk about in last a decade or so, they have been carrying out attacks in India. And I don't think, and that explains why Pakistan spent a lot of time, years, in FATF's grey list, because the world was aware of where these terrorist organizations, how they are working hand in hand with the Pakistani government, or I would say Pakistani government is just a puppet. It is more a Pakistani establishment, which the world knows. It's Pakistani army and their intelligence agency, which is ISI.
I'm going to focus for a moment on the military action against all of the different organizations that you were just talking about. And I'm going to show also parallels in that sense, because for the Indians to be able to directly attack, directly hit the sites that they want to attack and hit, that did not start in April after the horrific terror attack. What that takes is long-term gathering of information, the capability to both see with your eye, listen with your ear, understand where the locations are and what they have inside those locations, what weapons they have there, who is inside those different buildings. It goes hand in hand with building the type of military ammunition capabilities to attack the different sites. Again, I'm going into similarities. The similarities in that sense is that things are put underground, in bunkers, put inside areas that are safe for the terrorists. Inside, in this case, as you say, both the host country, it's the combination of the host country that's both hosting and helping, but I'm just focused for the moment on when you want to attack, the point that you want to make. And when you do so, when the host country is both hosting it and protecting it, you need to be able to get past the defenses of Pakistan itself. You have to have the information to be able to do so. You need to have the munitions, the capabilities to target very exactly. Just think about it right now as we're talking to each other, as we look at each other. How do you get to that exact point that you hit on the nose or on the ear and not on my cheek? And I put that in a facetious way, but I want people to understand that those capabilities are both in the gathering of information of where the target is, in the exactness of having munitions that can exactly get to what you want. And I want to add into it that I was very impressed with the way that the Indians attacked all of these different sites with very few, if not at all, no civilian casualties, meaning it didn't include within it Pakistanis who are not involved. And we can always talk about the involvement of a country and the education and what that means. But for the moment, I'm going to differentiate between the active members of the terror organizations that are supported, backed, and hosted by Pakistan, and between Pakistanis who live in Pakistan and they may think that they do a good thing, but they're not active members. They're not part of the actual organization itself. And all of these elements take information gathering, intelligence, and attack capabilities that you build over time. And I called it a war because when you build things, wars aren't, I mean, there's a term now that wars are going all the time, and sometimes you're in between the wars. But in this case, India took, after that attack, and specifically attacked the different sites of where the headquarters are, of where they're coming from, not on the border where exactly they came from. They went deep in to different sites, very diverse all over the place, to make sure that the next attack cannot happen, where they plan the attack, where they put it together, where they're doing all of that different gathering of information. And in this sense, Hamas is very challenging in that sense because it's a Palestinian but also terror organization based in the Gaza Strip. They're not from the outside. That's where they are. That's where they live. They live inside a very condensed area. So the parallels that I found much more were in Israel's actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hezbollah and the different Shiite and Iranian forces inside Syria. One additional point that I've been looking at, look at the difference between a host country. You share a very long border with Pakistan. We share a relative, everything's small compared to India in any
Yes, so
case,
true.
but we share a border with Lebanon, with Syria. We share a border with the Gaza Strip. But in those areas, you have terrorist organizations. But in this case, as you presented, the terror organizations inside Pakistan are recognized as such by the world, Aditi. And to me, that's one of my biggest problems, is that Hamas is not recognized as a terror organization by most of the world. It is by specific places. But for example, let's be clear to our listeners that Hamas is not recognized as a terror organization by India. And I say that because when you put the word before into it and you said they call themselves resistance, Hamas calls itself resistance. And here I also show the differences where each country that looks at the different terror organizations, non-state actors that are trying to attack them may define terrorism different. But that's a big challenge for all of us in the world nowadays. There's no agreed definition, not even in the United Nations, on what a terror organization is. And that leaves this open area where you can be fighting a war. You know that it's a just war. It's against a terror organization. You're destroying these elements to preempt, to stop them from doing the next attack like they did in April. You want to make sure that they cannot do such an attack. And the rest of the world is saying, why are you attacking something that they do not recognize because the organization calls itself resistance, the organization calls itself liberation. There are a lot of terms that usually go into the different terror organization names.
So I will go back to your point about intelligence, and then I'll talk about how the world has different standards. They have double standards when it comes to terrorism. But to build on your point about intelligence gathering, did it surprise you that India's ability to carry out an attack, such an attack, and I would not even say attack, actually to carry out such missile strikes, such
Such
strikes deep
precise.
inside, yeah, precise strikes inside Pakistan, hitting them where it hurts them the most. And how does usually this intelligence gathering, without disclosing the sensitive information, but how does a country, a state, carry out such an exercise? And how long does it take to arrive at where India stood
Yeah.
on 7th of May?
So I don't want to say I'm surprised. I'm impressed. There's a difference between
Okay.
being surprised and being impressed. Because I think that India, certainly over the last decade, and this has also been where there's been a much closer relationship between India and Israel, including within the realm of security and within that in intelligence, is learning and understanding what's best for India. And I think that I've seen over the last decade how India has looked at what India defines as India's threats and how they have been gathering and their capabilities. That still means that this is something that they've been doing, from my point of view, over a long period of time. To be able to get to this kind of result, this is not something that happened, as I said before, because of the attack on the horrific terror attack in April. This is something that you gather over 5 years, 10 years, because let's talk about the intelligence gathering and what you need to put into it. There's a variety of ways that you gather intelligence information about whatever you and I define as the enemy. Each one of us will define in a different way what we're gathering about. The capabilities have changed a lot over the last 10 years. The open sources, the social media means that at the end of the day, when I want to go look something up, and anybody listening to us right now, go use your capabilities. Bring up Google Maps, put onto it Google Earth, look into it, and you're going to be able right now to plan your trip to Pakistan. You know, say I'm going to Lahore, I want to look at Lahore and just see what's online in the amount of information. Those are the capabilities that are out there for all of us. Inside most of these capabilities were developed in the beginning inside the military intelligence establishments, and they're going to have their own capabilities that are that much more refined. It means the visuals, the satellites, the GPS, the capabilities that there's so much information out there that you can literally see the structure of the architecture of a building. You mentioned before the possibility of having a target where it goes through a dome, down to the bunker, into the ground, where you can have the architect. It's going to be online inside the architectural firm where you can see how a building was built, how thick the concrete is. And then what you do is with that intelligence, which you get from a lot of it is open sources nowadays, but it's open sources that you need to be able to get to. It isn't necessarily ones that you and I can get to easily, even though a lot of information is out there. And you put in a lot of effort. I think that India has put in a lot of effort into the gathering capabilities. And from that gathering capability, you do the analysis on how to both counterattack, where you want to attack, what is the most effective kind of attack you can do. I'm going to put it here as question marks. What's more effective? To attack and kill people, leaders? If you kill them and you take out the leadership, is that what makes the difference to prevent against the next terror attack? That may be in the immediate sense. In long term, there are going to be other people that are going to come instead of them. Maybe what you want to do is destroy the capability, that they don't have the weapons, they don't have the arms. Gotta tell you, you do that, you're going to have to do that all the time, every day, because sadly in the world of today, there are a lot of arms out there. So it's really looking at it in a lot of different ways. It never ends. And if there's one message, which to me is a sad message, but it's a very clear one, is that the very effective, successful Indian attack against these different Pakistani hordes of weapons, different sites and capabilities is so important. And you need to know that now they're going to rebuild themselves and it will be there again. It prevents the next attack. It delays the one after that, but that doesn't in any way address the core issues of the education, the extremism, the ones that bring about the existence of these horrific terror organizations.
And the very ability to carry out such a strike deep inside Pakistan. The world has talked about India's air defense capabilities and how the Chinese made in China air defense systems couldn't stop Indian missiles, and they couldn't control or give. What should I say? That India has been able to breach through Pakistan's air defense system. Did that surprise you?
There, the parallels to Israel's counterattacks against Iran in April and October of 2024 immediately came to mind, because it's country against country, it's air defense against the incoming capability of airplanes and different type of aerial projectiles. And here you could see the parallels. The Iranian defense systems were mainly Russian. You said Pakistani or Chinese. I immediately can see the parallels in the fact that Israel got through the Iranian defenses and basically attacked wherever they want, and in a very precise way. In the first occasion in April, we didn't talk about it a lot. In October, we actually presented photographs to show what we had done. So again, I'm going to say I'm impressed, not surprised. I think that that's part of the importance nowadays, is understanding that you need to know how to get past the defenses. But let's be clear, it means that the Chinese or the Russians, if it comes to the Iranians or the Russians themselves who are in a war, are looking at how did they get past my defenses? What does that mean about my defenses? How do they up them for next time? And you always have to be very, very good at, when you're attacking, at attacking the present defenses and not the ones you did last time. Meaning you always have to be fighting the next war and not fighting the war that was. And in this case, as I say, I was very impressed with the Indian intelligence capability and the operational capability. And I saw the immediate parallels mainly of what Israel did against Iran, because again, it's a state actor with those kind of defenses.
A little while ago, you were talking about we were discussing the double standards of the world towards terrorism. What has come to my mind is, as you rightly pointed out, have we even defined terrorism at the UN? What is terrorism? How are you going to hold states which sponsor terrorism accountable? Because
So,
I saw US comparing, actually US putting India, Pakistan at par with India. India was the victim, whereas Pakistan is an aggressor. The terrorist organizations that they harbor, they are responsible for carrying out strikes in India, attacks in India. And
okay.
India was just responding to that. And that really hurts me because the world talks about terrorism. We see a lot of, bombastic speech coming from world leaders. They come, they speak, but then I think they forget about it. And everybody is very selective about what is terrorism and what is not.
So I'm going to agree with you, but now I'm going to give a slightly different definition in that sense, because terrorism is not countries and nation states. Terrorism is done by non-state actors. So Pakistan can absolutely be a terrorist sponsor state, a host country. But I'm not saying this is an academic definition, but the definition of terrorism itself is that it's done by non-state actors. My challenge is that when non-state actors do so, and those are the different organizations that you were talking about before, that are hosted, that are backed. As I said, that Pakistan is a terrorist sponsor state, just like Iran is a terrorist sponsor state, and Syria under Bashar al-Assad was a terrorist sponsor state. And I could give some other examples, but I'm going to be, wary of where I go with that one, because that terrorist sponsor, but those are nation states. When a country attacks with its capability, it's a country. When it attacks another country, okay? Because in that sense, what India did very carefully is they said, we're attacking the terror sites inside Pakistan. And so when we talk about those definitions, terrorism in that sense is the non-state actors who openly and clearly define that to achieve their political aim, they're willing to use any type of violence. It's both physical violence, verbal violence, but horrific violence against civilians. Because organizations that use violence only against military forces, in the terminology, that's called guerrilla warfare. All of the terrorist organizations call themselves freedom, liberation. None of them call themselves terror organizations. And that distinction is going to be done from the outside in. And all of the terror organizations are going to say, I only attacked soldiers. And you take the attack, horrific attack, in April of 2025 that you had in India, where honeymooners and families were massacred in a beautiful, lovely spot. That is a terror attack under any type of definition I'm going to give. That's not freedom, that's not liberation, and it's not guerrilla. When India attacks terror sites inside Pakistan, and again, Pakistan's the host country, it's the double edge of how you define it, because it's country against the host country, against those different terror sites. Israel has a very challenging aspect when it comes to that, because Lebanon is a host country to terror organizations, but it doesn't help them per se. On the other hand, Hezbollah is Lebanese, and so it's part of Lebanon. It's very challenging. And so in this case, I'm just saying with the definitions, that's one of the reasons that the world, the United Nations, the only organization, as an organization, that the United Nations agreed in the United Nations Counterterrorism Task Force, they have such a thing, to define as terrorism was Daesh, the Islamic State, as it existed in 2014, 15, 16. And that because of that, everybody in the world, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, everybody said we're against ISIS. Nobody's willing to be the host of ISIS because that was the only one that was defined by the world, the only one.
I'm going back to the point about intelligence gathering, and I'm just curious because I kept reading it somewhere on social media. How does India and Israel collaborate, or they do intelligence sharing? Because people kept saying on social media, I would not say there's no official statement on this, but people have been speculating, if I may use that word, that probably Mossad also played a role in being so precise when it comes to the target deep inside Pakistan.
So, first of all, I want to say that the Indians should be impressed by the Indians and that Israel has many challenges in the world. And if we're the ones who are going to be the only ones gathering intelligence, it doesn't work that way, okay? Pakistan for us is still very, very far away. We're going to be focused on the fact that, Iran for us is such a big, challenging threat on so many different levels that when you get to Iran, how do you get to Iran? And you see what Iran, what they border, and they border both Afghanistan, but also Pakistan, so that you can see why we would be in different places, but it has to do with the threats that apply to Israel. You definitely have intelligence relationships in the world. It's even called nowadays sometimes military diplomacy and intelligence diplomacy. You think of diplomacy as being just between countries and between leaders, and there's also a portion of it which has to do with joining together against joint enemies. So Pakistan does not have diplomatic ties with Israel. Pakistan, in that sense, never recognized Israel. By the way, voted against us, against the establishment of Israel in the partition plan. But here I have to be clear, so did India in 1947. That was in a different world. And since then, we have full diplomatic relations with India. Pakistan, we do not have relations with, because they are a host country for horrific terror organizations that have impact. Overwhelmingly, these are Sunni Muslim jihadi organizations. That's going to be a common ground. You're going to be looking at it together. You already mentioned before, there's crossovers of different Hamas operatives, or Hezbollah not as much, but mainly from the Sunni world, which is Hamas, who can get to places where they can train, where they can get, because there's a host country, so you have more freedom there. It could have been Afghanistan in the past or Pakistan today. And I give that because, yes, there's obviously going to be some type of cooperation. But again, I give very high points and understanding to the Indians' own capability here. We may have ideas and we can inspire, but we're not the ones who are doing these things on the ground. That's fully going to be Indian.
Absolutely, and this our armed forces, they have won 4 wars, and I think when India was about to take on Pakistan, and we were planning these strikes, there were many who said that Russia, Ukraine have been fighting for years, Israel have been fighting for years, and if India gets drawn in this, probably it may last for years. But Indian armed forces proved that, as you pointed out, it's a war, but the wars can be finished in 4 days' time, and probably less than 4 days' time. So, as an Indian, we are really proud of them, nothing to take away from them. But what I was trying to do was to understand how it operates between the allies who are fighting, who are united against the same threat, which in this case is terrorism. Were
Right.
you surprised, Colonel Miri? Were you surprised the way world reacted or responded? Here, I would like to draw your attention to the statements from the US before 10th. And on 10th of May, they were like, it's not our fight, it's not our war. They were like, we aren't bothered, and then suddenly they jumped into this, whatever may have transpired, the heavy losses that Pakistan suffered. But overall, the way China, Turkey, Azerbaijan, they stood with Pakistan, they openly came out. We saw Israel standing by us, Russia supporting us, but largely I didn't see big statements coming from the big countries. And people often associate this with the war of selling ammunition. So, probably, I'm not speculating, but I'm just trying to build a logic on this. The world saw an opportunity for selling their arms if there is a new conflict in Southeast Asia. How would you see that?
I think that the world from the outside, and here it's something I'm saying now as an Israeli, I'm sitting inside Israel, and when I look from afar, I think that when it comes specifically to India, Pakistan, they're not looking at the terrorism, at the infiltrations, at the horrific acts. They immediately zoom out to India and Pakistan both being nuclear powers. And I think that what happens is that when you look at a confrontation between two countries who are each nuclear powers, they're not equal, but they are each nuclear powers. Everybody goes to there. Everybody wants to go, oh, we don't want this to get to a nuclear confrontation. And the nuclear capabilities between India and Pakistan are vastly different. And because of that, India, responsible in the world, very large capabilities, is different from Pakistan that has made statements that are very scary when it comes to that. So I don't think of it as a double standard. I think of it of every country looking at what threatens them, at what scares them. And I think that the world has always looked since the 1970s, since both countries achieved nuclear capability, that of all the places in the world, the only place that they're worried about a nuclear confrontation is India, Pakistan. That's like the stereotype that comes to mind. I also think that Russia looks at things from a Russian point of view. Russia, the largest country in the world physically in its size, not in its population. You, India, are the largest in population. China, large in size, very large in population, smaller than you. Each one has different challenges. China borders you. You have issues in a joint border. Russia does not border you. Russia is in a war against Ukraine. How the world looks at Russia's war against Ukraine, everybody they're all looking going, see, it's not me, I'm against Ukraine. And then they're going to look, they want to do the parallels which help them. Okay? And I'm going to say that about every country. So when you look at both the criticism and for that matter also the support, very often it just has to do with where the country that is either against you or supporting you is within its own regional politics and even sometimes domestic politics. The only ones that are really in that sense of interest to me are the United States, okay? And here you had a change of administration. You have a vastly different world. Aditi, I wake up every single day. Right now, President Trump is here in this, in the arena in Middle East as we go around, day by day. I don't know the world she is changing when it comes to the United States and how they view the world. I don't know right now what President Trump's statements mean when it comes to India, Pakistan. I will know one thing. He likes to say, I don't want war anywhere. I want a deal. So, and I don't know what it will say. I mean, again, it's a different way of looking at a war. I don't think of a war as being about a deal. It's usually about ideology. It's usually about a lot of other things, but that's a different way of looking at it. So I breathe in deep because of all of the countries in the world, and my heart goes out both to India and to the terror attacks and to the similarities of the type of terrorism that you've had in India from places like Pakistan, but not only, is that we can both be vilified, criticized for our actions against those who host terrorism and who do terrorism, but we're going to stand up and act. Okay, we know at the end that it's not a question of being justified. This isn't about the justice, okay? It's about defending our countries against horrific terror organizations. And so sometimes I try to not listen to some of that criticism that comes out, not because I don't have a heart, not because I think that everybody's wrong all the time, But in this case, I think as we talked before about what is terrorism and how do you define terrorism, okay, India has the justification against terror organizations that have attacked you for so many years, that are building up all of the time. And everything else, politics, geopolitics, for the moment, try to ignore them as much as you can.
That is such a good advice. I kept thinking that these countries, they want to come to our market, they need us. And when it came to this war, they chose to be silent. Pakistan getting IMF package for what? For sponsoring these terror outfits, for carrying out attacks against our civilians. So I would be very honest, I was very hurt. I was really hurt, and I felt it was
So
on the world.
my
But
heart goes
now,
out to you, but I do say, okay, I completely understand. And in that sense, I mean, just think for us, after the year and 7 months of fighting, Hamas started a war, a horrific war, and the entire international community is very focused on the human suffering in the Gaza Strip. And my heart can go out to the human suffering in the Gaza Strip. There's a very clear-cut way to end it, and that is that Hamas, A, does not exist with its capabilities, and certainly that it doesn't rule the Gaza Strip. And yet nobody says that. Everybody comes to us.
so true, so true. My last question, because that was part of your presentation that I had seen, and I won't take long. I know I had sought half an hour from you, so apologies that I have jumped way beyond that. But how do you see this war of narratives? Because I can easily recall what happened on October 7, 2023, the way it was the way it was live on social media. Now we see a lot of propaganda, fake news, fake videos from the Pakistani side. When they are beaten, they claim thumping victory. I know it's not new for them. They still believe that they won the 1971 war, where they were divided into two by India when East Pakistan went on to become Bangladesh. So I don't expect honesty or some sort of introspection from them. But how do you win this war of narrative? India has done exceedingly well. Our armed forces, they have come out, they have given evidence. As opposed to Pakistan, they have just picked up. Their defense minister goes and says the evidence is available all over the social media. I really don't know whether their defense policy and their fight was formulated upon the basis of social media videos. But whatever said and done, the war of narratives. How do you see that?
So the war of narratives is something that's being fought mainly on social media, as you mentioned. Here we get into the challenge. Each of us are in an echo box, meaning we hear our narrative, we hear our framing, and that framing is usually going to be, and in a moment I'll present this in one of two different kinds of languages, and that framing is going to be with terminology that in my framing, in my echo box, I'm comfortable with. Most of us never really hear the other narrative, and if we do, it looks both fake, untrue, completely, misinformation, disinformation, and it may be so, but we always have to look at each one. So what am I talking about? Most wars nowadays, certainly the India-Pakistan one, the ones that we're involved in, are looked at in social media in one of two different languages. Through security eyes. And a lot of what we have been talking now, Aditi, is what I'm going to call through security eyes, meaning it's both about the terrorism, the attacks, the capabilities of the terrorists themselves, of how we defend ourselves, of the use of the military force. And it's not a question of justification. We are defending ourselves. These are big words. We're not talking
Absolutely.
about the individuals. It's a whole language of how we describe the war. And there's a different way of describing war, which I like to call humanitarian. And it's looking through the eyes of victims. And let's be very clear, in every war, on all sides, there are always victims. The question is if you can look at a war through the victims, through that aspect of what happens to, I'm going to call them innocent bystanders. That's always a term which is challenging. Are they involved? Aren't they involved? But I'm going to say in that sense, the ones who are not directly part of the terror organization or the military for that matter, a lot of other people in and around. And when you look at it from that point of view, when it's what happened to Miri, what happened to you, when you talk about it from the personal point of view, when you show a clip which can be correct. It doesn't even have to be, even though there's lots of fake ones, as we all know, but even if it isn't a fake one, If it's one that happened, you have to check nowadays, where did it happen? When did it happen? What's the context? And as I said, it's like a zoom in on the individual. Individuals suffer in war. Or it's a zoom out where you're talking about what is it about? Why did a war start? Wars don't start. Somebody starts it. There was terrorists attacked and murdered innocent people in India. India attacked, counterattacked in that sense against those terror bases that are held in Pakistan. That's what I call it. It's like that's description. It isn't about just the individuals who were murdered in India, or perhaps I'm saying perhaps because in war there are always additional victims that happen to be next to the terror base. Just think of the numbers. They'll say 15 people were killed in the terror base. And I'm like, we could call that 15 terrorists. We could call that 15. And those differences on the way that it's presented very much impact all sides. And I don't know how you win the war of narratives. The most you can try to do is to get people to see more than one narrative. That's an immense challenge to do within itself, because we all live within our echo boxes. What I always try to say is be aware of the echo boxes. Be aware of the different terminology. And I literally will sit down and write the different words, the different terms. You said before that the terror organization calls itself now Liberation. When you use those kinds of terms, it has implications. And so I'll say to people, they call themselves Liberation. Let's look at what they're calling for in their liberation, for the annihilation, the destruction of the other side. Okay, so their liberating is in destroying something. So it's really to try to get into the words, into the terminology, to point it out. It's the only way you can try to go forward. And having said all of that, I really do think that we have to swallow in deep, as I said before, sometimes kind of close my ears and not listen to both criticism and otherwise, but to understand that it isn't always going to be just the way I view things. Maybe I'm not viewing it well. I'll give one more example, because I like and love talking both on Indian to you, on Indian TV and Indian media. And for me, I'm Israeli. Indian media is a different cultural event for me. And in Indian media, I am very held accountable and asked about the amount of civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip. And it's a horrific number. It's tens of thousands of people. And for me to answer and say that 20,000 of the 50,000 are terrorists is a strong statement. But that means that 30,000 are civilians. Okay? And I say that when we talk about things, that understanding that there are people on the other side. And in education, we want to change that education. I would say that at the bottom line, it's about extremism in education. And I don't expect tomorrow morning for all of us to get along and be peaceful, but it is to listen and to try to understand more nuance. And I think that today in social media, we've lost the capability to actually acknowledge nuance in any conversation.
Absolutely. And here I would slightly differ from you in the sense that, yes, education is the problem. But when it comes to India and Pakistan, a country which came into being on the very basis of anti-India, anti-Hindu stand, I don't expect empathy from them. But at the same time, I want them to stop sponsoring terrorists and terrorism in India, in which they choose to target innocent civilians as they have done so many
Absolutely.
times in the past. And I would also like to point out, as you rightly pointed out, to the number of victims. If I compare the two forces, Indian armed forces, they chose not to target the civilians, whereas the Pakistani army, they targeted civilians in Punch, and
Yes.
they destroyed their homes, they killed them. Innocent people died, and a civilian like me, I always wondered, because I was in border areas, and there is a sector which is known as Kiran sector, where you can just see right across it's POJK, which is the area which has been illegally occupied by Pakistan. And if Indian forces wanted, they could have targeted those areas, and not the civilians actually. They could have targeted the Pakistani post and given
Very
them huge
important.
losses. But yet, to protect the casualty to avoid the casualty to the civilians, they didn't go down that path. Though I often wondered,
Absolutely.
as a citizen of this country and seeing so many innocent civilians dying in Punch, I just felt, what are these guys made of?
My
If they
heart goes
wanted,
out, and I absolutely concur. And in that sense of the narratives, it's not about our agreeing, it's about our acknowledging. And in that sense, it's that you're two states, you're going to continue to have a joint border. And how do you get to a situation where they're not about sending terrorists into your country? And I absolutely agree, understand, and the parallels to here are immense. But in the war of narratives, it's not that they're suddenly going to say India is right. And there's
absolutely,
a
fully
gap
agree with you.
between that sort of thing that we need to be aware of. I mean, like, as I say, I'm going to continue to defend both what India's right is, what Israel's right is against these
Thank you so
horrific
much.
Islamic
Thank you so much for giving
terrorists.
us this empathy, for
Thank
giving
you.
us this empathy and understanding what we go through on daily basis. And we also fully understand what it means to be the real victim of terrorism. And as you rightly pointed out, you have a right to defend. So do we. And if our civilians going to be targeted, our forces have made it clear, government has made it clear, any act of terror would be considered act of war. And the host country, which in this case is Pakistan, harboring terrorist outfits, they would pay. And if they
Absolutely.
choose to go down that path, they should pay.
They
That's
should.
the choice they have made. But anyways, thank you so much, Colonel Miri. I really appreciate. I wish we could just go on and go on, but I really loved every second of this interaction. And thank you so much. And apologies that I know I asked for half an hour and I ended up taking your 48 minutes, but I really loved it. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so
And
much. And I hope to be hosted again. And I wish us all
absolutely.
quiet times where terrorists are not hosted by any country.
Amen. Thank
Amen.
you so much. And
Thank you.
I'm already looking forward to the other interaction that we may have in future at some point in time, hopefully sooner than later. Thank you so much. Bye bye and take care.
Thank you so much.